The Department of Government Efficiency, also known as DOGE, has been a rather seismic force in Washington, D.C. and across America over the past few weeks as of posting this video of the beginning of the second term of President Donald Trump. And so it has caused a lot of shockwaves. It's kind of shocked the system, so to speak, in many ways, shapes, or form. It has drawn a lot of high eyebrows who are shocked. It's drawn a lot of praise, and it's also drawn a lot of scorn as well.
Nobody voted for Elon Musk. Nobody voted for Elon Musk. Nobody voted for Elon Musk. Get Musk out of the White House.
First and foremost, Elon Musk. Who the hell does Musk think he is? He has absolutely no right in shutting down USAID.
What Elon Musk is doing is illegal.
But for me, DOGE is not simply a rebuke to waste, fraud, and abuse, which it most certainly is doing a great job in sorting out. DOGE, in my opinion, is actually one of the strongest forces against one of the most pervasive moral doctrines that have perverted the science of American politics. And that moral doctrine is utilitarianism. Never before have we seen such a resounding rebuke on an institutional level of utilitarianism in recent American history. So I thought it would be very interesting to explore DOGE's activities in light of the moral character of it, the critiques against it, trace back the prominence and the origins of the doctrine of utilitarianism within American society, and then demonstrate how DOGE is actively fighting against this moral doctrine with sound and right thinking surrounding governance and surrounding spending. Before we get to that, my friends, hope all of you doing well. I'm Christian Moss. Thank you so much for being here. If you enjoy political and social commentary with a philosophical bent, then I must implore you, please like, share, comment, subscribe. Do whatever you can, my friends, to ensure that our channel is successful. We are close to 20,000 subscribers, my friends. If you believe in our project, if you believe in having a more philosophical character to the way Americans view their country, which was, by the way, the same character that many people in the founding generation had towards issues of the day, and it's the same character that forged our great nation, then I must please implore you to be here, support this channel, support me. You can like, share, comment, subscribe, and if you want to go the extra mile, no obligation, but if you want to, you can absolutely as well send a donation. It'll help me keep these videos coming. Thank you guys so much, and now please enjoy the video. So, DOGE has been a rather seismic force, as I mentioned before. But more than anything else, I think DOGE is particularly interesting on a civilizational level. For two reasons, actually, before I get into the moral doctrine of utilitarianism. DOGE itself reflects the ingenuity of the digital age applied to political organization. What exactly do I mean? So many of you may know that DOGE was actually a meme. It was actually just additionally a social media meme that was meant to cause laughs and just, cause people to smile. But that meme became an acronym for something much more powerful than a laugh, but that contains the same creativity. I almost said spiritual creativity. You could possibly even say that. The same spiritual creativity that expression and joy and comedy actually contain as well. Because DOGE is bringing in some of the brightest minds in the country to engineer and understand some of the most complex, obtuse, and needlessly convoluted systems that govern the various processes and functions of the American government system. So I think that's just very interesting on a civilizational level, how you can transition between something being a joke to something being a creative force for positive change. But then the second thing, as I mentioned before, is that it is a rebuke of utilitarianism. And by being a rebuke of utilitarianism, it is actually an affirmation of a different moral doctrine, an affirmation of the first principles of the American founding, an affirmation of the rules-based norm ethical systems that actually gave America not only our moral legitimacy, but also in general gave many people in the West during the Enlightenment a new moral outlook that sought to secure peace and justice and prosperity and order and virtue for all. And that is the focus of this video today. So, DOGE has been going through different agencies, and we're going to focus actually on three particular agencies today. We're going to focus on USAID, we're going to focus on the CFPF, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and we're going to focus on the Education Department but there have been many more they've gone through as well. But they've gone through agencies and they have suggested cuts, and so far the results have been tangible. According to Elon Musk, DOGE has saved about $1 billion for the American people, and DOGE has terminated over $900 million in education department contracts, which they determined were wasteful and not going towards the actual benefit of American education. DOGE exposed a wide series of needless funds and abuses undertaken by USAID, some of which include, for example, $25 million to Deloitte, which is a consultant company, for green transportation in Europe, $6 million for tourism development in Egypt, $2.5 million to foster inclusion in Vietnam, a country that America has had a terrible history with. And in fact, I think that if anything, we should be doing less in Vietnam and other countries, and we should probably instead be apologizing for some things that we've done. But that's a different story, a different day. $5 million to EcoHealth Alliance, which is an organization that helped develop the gain-of-function research at Wuhan Lab. $20 million for an organization tied to the Russiagate impeachment inquiry. Several millions of dollars for LGBTQ-related initiatives worldwide in countries that disapprove of such doctrines, like Uganda, like South Africa, like the Western Balkans, so on and so forth. So all these things are being spent with American taxpayer dollars. DOGE shined a light on it, and people were shocked, and they were abhorred, rightfully so. Now, anyone who's been observing these things for a while knows this is not new. We've known about the USAID's excursions in other countries for about 4 or 5 years, even more than that now. It was all over the media, just you had to know where to look for it. But regardless, I'm happy that more people are actually finally understanding the extent to which the notion of the arsenal of democracy, the notion of America being the exporter of democracy, the model for the world, has been used to actually advance agendas that destabilize the social orders and the cultures of other societies, and in a pernicious way also extends American geopolitical influence. It's a positive if more Americans recognize this unfortunate fact of American geopolitical policy and reject it. But that's besides the point. So all these things have been shown as a result of DOGE being in effect. But and then cuts have been summarily suggested, corrections have been suggested to fix some of these things. DEI initiatives have been cut, for example. But in response to everything I just said, in response to the abuses being shown and the cuts being suggested, the progressives and other people who support these programs, who have called themselves defenders of the bureaucracy — there was a Wall Street Journal piece that actually came out and said that the Democrats are now defenders of bureaucracy. Well, they always have been. If you understand the history of American utilitarianism, this won't be a novel observation. I'll get that in a second. They have come out and they have said that these oversights and these corrections are not merely oversights and corrections of programs. They're not merely oversights and corrections of the flow of money towards particular initiatives. Rather, they are attacks, assaults against morally virtuous things. They are attacks and assaults against the financial security of people. They are attacks and assaults against the ability for poor countries to have food and water. They are attacks and assaults against fighting real corruption. They are attacks and assaults against education. They are attacks and assaults against the initiatives to eliminate poverty. They are attacks and assaults to ensuring healthcare is provided. They are attacks and assaults to, as Bernie Sanders said, Medicaid, Medicare, community health centers, Pell Grants, affordable housing. They are attacks and assaults against the poor. If you don't believe me, we'll just go through a few examples before I respond to them. They are attacks and assaults against the American mission around the world. Here's Senator Chris Murphy at a protest to go against these cuts, saying several things about USAID's geopolitical maneuvering across the world that he says justifies its existence and makes its non-existence a peril to American life. Go.
USAID fights terrorist groups all across this world, making sure that we address the underlying causes for a retreat to terrorism. USAID chases China all around the world, making sure that China doesn't monopolize contracts for critical minerals and port infrastructure all around the world. It supports freedom fighters everywhere in this world. Up until yesterday, delivering firewood, for instance, to the brave Ukrainian defenders on the Eastern Front.
Okay, here's Bernie Sanders saying that all of the things I mentioned, the poor, are under attack due to the cuts to USAID. Go.
What Musk is trying to do right now is to destroy USAID, a program which helps hungry and sick children all over the world, the poorest people in the world. That's what the richest guy in the world is doing. Today, he's going after USAID. Trust me, tomorrow, he will be going after the programs that impact you and your family. That is Medicaid, that is Medicare, that is community health centers, that is education, that is Pell Grants, that is affordable housing.
Now here's Elizabeth Warren saying that the attempt to eliminate the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is actually a bad, and it actually is going to help banks get away with fraud. And
if you have a bank account or a credit card or a mortgage or a student loan, this is code red. I am ringing the alarm bell. Elon Musk and the guy who wrote Project 2025, Russ Vought, are trying to kill the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. If they succeed, CEOs and Wall Street will once again be free to trick, trap, and cheat you.
And of course, there are more and more examples of all of these arguments. So all of these arguments actually are very interesting. In fact, there's this article here that I showed you that basically said because USAID's funding is being cut, now people in poor countries are being disadvantaged. The interesting thing about this is these are not just sob stories. In fact, these are rather reflections, as mentioned, of a certain moral outlook that has dominated the way American politics has operated for over 120 plus years, and most importantly, has dominated the way and shaped the perceptions that so many different Americans have towards the responsibilities, the roles, and the functions of their own government. And they have done so in a very negative fashion, and has done so in a way that presumes something that is actually manifestly false. It presumes several things that are actually manifestly false. The common thread to all of the critiques I just showed you is that they presume a conception of what in philosophy we call the good, which I'll explain in a second. And they presume that this idea of the good is based on certain effects, to certain desirable outcomes. And these are a narrow set of effects that they presume are good, that do not cover unseen costs, that do not cover the ever-changing tides of the good, and also, therefore, do not cover if the origins of these programs, if the origins of these initiatives are actually in themselves morally justified. They just presume it for a particular reason. And so let's actually address this idea of the good very quickly before we move on. So, within ethics, there's a tension between two dominant ideas. The ideas are the good, capital G good, and the right. So those who believe in this notion of the good, you could describe this to different people. To utilitarians, people who are virtue ethicists, who believe that the outcomes of your character are actually morally, or the moral, or the focus on morality. Aristotle, so on and so forth. They believe that the good is a set of things that bring about an affair that inspires and provides people with welfare, happiness, satisfaction, or so on and so forth. That's one conception of the good. And also people believe that the good is distributed amongst persons and itself it is identifiable in their own life. For them, morally right choices are those choices that produce the good, which is simply a state of affairs that brings about a certain consequence, a certain kind of thing that they want to see. So in other words, their morality is based primarily on consequences. The right is a different kind of moral thinking, which says that norms and rules, general norms, general rules, and general principles are actually the source of moral behavior. Because you can do actions that bring forth a desirable set of circumstances that disadvantage somebody in a way that would be immoral. You could, for example, rob somebody and give their money towards a poor person or towards a group of poor people, and then say you're helping alleviate poverty because you're just taking some money from somebody who already has something and you're giving something to somebody who has nothing, therefore increasing their standing in life. Therefore, that brings about some kind of positive outcome. Whereas the person that believes in the right, in the rules-based kind of ethics, would say, no, you stole from somebody, and that can never be justified, even if it does bring about some kind of desirable consequence. And so this is a tension that's been going on for centuries. And I have no intention of solving this tension for a very long time, although many of you know I am most certainly on the side of the right. I don't believe that the good is a stable, ethical idea. However, for generations, many people do believe the good is a stable ethical idea. And in the name of pursuing the good, they have sought to embrace authoritarian and totalitarian systems of political organization. They have sought to embrace bureaucratic modes of political organization. They have sought to embrace managerialism as a means of ensuring the best kind of society that can be created. And by doing so, they have limited the ability of the individual to achieve greatness. They have limited the ability for society to help its own. And most importantly, they have justified unjustifiable political programs and tied them indispensably to virtue. This is precisely what the progressives have done. And this is precisely the grounds upon which the Democrats who are trying to defend these programs on consequentialist utilitarian grounds almost certainly doing. So again, they presume an idea of the good that is an unstable ethical concept in this particular case. But not only that, they also presume the necessity of political involvement in these particular issues. I'm going to go over them in a second because of this reason as well, because they believe they bring about good consequence. So let's go for USAID. You heard Chris Murphy say that the best thing about USAID is that it, in particular, being very specific to what he actually said, is that it supports freedom fighters around the world, chases China around the world, and fights terrorist groups all across the world. Without actually asking the question, should we be fighting terrorist groups all across the world? Should we be supporting freedom fighters? What is a freedom fighter? What is their idea of freedom? Are these freedom fighters that come from cultures that actually have an idea of freedom that is not at all what the American conception is? If so, why should we perpetuate anti-American ideas? None of these questions are asked because origins, right? The distinction between efficient causes and final causes. Efficient causes being the origin, the thing that brings about something, that causes something to arise. For example, birth. For example, the gyro of a car making the car move. Those are sacrificed and ignored for the sake of final causes. In other words, for the sake of the goals that something decides to bring about, which is the moral error. If the efficient cause is negative, or if the efficient cause makes no sense, the final cause will simply be a reflection of that which makes no sense, even if it can be spun in a way that seems to be virtuous. So why should USAID be doing all these different things? That is, the question is not asked. What is the obligation an agency has to its own people when it uses their funds? Well, the obligations are very simple, and they're laid out in the Constitution, they're laid out in American political history. The obligation should be to preserve the people, to preserve the society, preserve the people, preserve the Constitution, to ensure that the homeland is defended, and to ensure that our concrete interests, not our disembodied interests, but our concrete interests are pursued. And if USAID goes against those efficient causes, those origins, then how in the world can it be justified? It can't, because no conception of the good can remove the evil origins of something. If the tree is poisonous, the fruit cannot therefore be pure. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Now, this is a very interesting one because the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau it was created immediately in the aftermath after the 2007 financial crisis, and it was created to be a check on the big banks. But the true error of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is that it was what's implied by its existence. First of all, that citizens must entrust a sort of benevolent authority to oversee their financial affairs, which invades the sphere of private life and undermines the autonomy to actually make personal decisions. Part of life is risk, and part of risk is being able to govern your decisions by the best reason you have at your disposal. And part of that is going to be rejecting paternalism. But the CFPF is actually a product of paternalistic thinking. The second part of the error is found in the genesis of the crisis, which was supposed to fix it by ensuring that the financial industry is kept in check. But this ignores that the financial industry in that crisis was actually due, in a lot of cases, to government intervention, not only that, to government regulation, and not only that, to the government regulating for the benefit of the financial industry. So how in the world do you think you're going to actually fix the problem of state interventionism by doing more of that is absolutely beyond me. Both in its inception and its ethos, the CFPB, fails to justify its existence. It requires an invented fiction that managerialism can help us create a safer society in order to actually work. But once that fiction is shattered by the light of truth and is tested against reality, and the fact is that the CFPB has actually not done all that much to protect people from frauds and scams that still happen on a mass scale, the fact that it is potentially and debatably unconstitutional, and the fact that it is an invasion of the private sphere, all of these efficient things, efficient causes, are reason, again, for a rejection of this perversion on the American political system. Just because it supposedly does a good thing does not mean it is constituted in a good way. And that which is not constituted in a good way, to harmoniously accord to general principles, cannot be a sustainable tool for good. It can only be a tool at the very best for discordance and at the very worst for ruin. Again, but Elizabeth Warren was trying to justify this on the basis of it being a protection for consumers, which presumes, again, an idea of the good, which is fundamentally unstable. The education department, there are a lot of people that are saying that public education is under attack. Well, the notion of public education is actually rather new. And it's a new notion that was invented by sort of German idealism that invaded America through the kind of coming back of American intellectuals from Germany who studied under the Prussian system, that said that the pupil should be trained to be a machine to benefit the society. John Dewey, one of the architects of the American public education system, at least its ethos, was very clear that he believed education should not be about general matters that help refine the mind and build up skills of the individual, but rather it should be a means of ensuring the pupil will have a kind of social consciousness that will make them a contributor to the society around them in a way where they are not distinguished from that society. So in other words, public education was meant to be a means of wrapping up an automaton-like kind of human to push out the sort of inputs that society had put into them into being outputs. That's basically what it is. And there are several other quotes from prominent people within the public education movement in the early 1900s that actually justify this idea. So again, all of these arguments are utilitarian, but they have a presence in the American political system. So I'm actually going to read to you, before I close, a set of quotes from different thinkers in the early progressive era who kind of explain why this kind of thinking is praised by a lot of different progressives. This is from Herbert Croly, who was actually the founder of the New Republic and whose ideas contributed quite a lot to the ideas that were adopted in the sort of new nationalist program of Woodrow Wilson, the New Deal, and the Great Society. He said, "The Constitution was the expression not only of a political faith, but also of political fears. Individual and states' rights had their value in American national history. It remains nonetheless true, however, that every popular government should in the end, and after necessarily prolonged deliberation, possess the power of taking any action which, in the opinion of a decisive majority of the people, is demanded by the public welfare. Such is not the case with the government organized under the federal Constitution. A very small percentage of the American people can permanently thwart the will of an enormous majority, and there can be no justification for such a condition on any possible theory of popular sovereignty." So he's saying that the fact that the Constitution protects the minority and that the minority can thwart the majority is bad and it's evil, because it goes against the good of the whole, it goes against public welfare, it goes against this conception that the best state of affairs, in his view, should be that which is pursued by political and moral action. Woodrow Wilson, in the Constitutional Government of the United States, 1908, said some of our presidents have deliberately held themselves off from using the full power they might have legitimately used because of the conscientious scruples, because they were more theorists than statesmen. They have held the strict literary theory of the Constitution, the Whig theory, the Newtonian theory, but the makers of the Constitution were statesmen, not pedants. The president is at liberty, both in law and conscience, to be as big a man as he can. His capacity will set the limit, and if Congress be overborne by him, it will be no fault of the makers of the Constitution. It will be from no lack of constitutional powers on his part, but only because the president has a nation behind him. So the president can defy limits, defy rules, defy norms, moral and otherwise, to ensure that the good of the nation, once again, is persisting. Theodore Roosevelt, who a lot of folks like for some reason, I don't know why. I think he was behind a lot of the negative ideas that contributed to the decline of American political order, he said the following. We hold it in the New Nationalism speech. He said, we grudge no man a fortune which represents his own power and sagacity, when exercised with the entire regard to the welfare of his fellows. We grudge no man a fortune in civil life that it is honorably obtained and well used. It is not even though that it should have been gained without doing damage to the community. We should permit it to be gained only so long as the gaining represents the benefit to the community. This, I know, implies a policy of a far more active governmental interference with social and economic and conditions in this country that we have yet had, but I think we have got to face the fact that such an increase in governmental control is now necessary. So if you have this conception of the good, which says morality can only happen if a particular set of outcomes is created, and then that conception of the good is then imposed upon the society through political authority, rather than being debated and picked apart for being the subjective and the narrow doctrine that it is, because there are plenty of problems. Who's good? How do you calculate the good? This is one of the issues with the idea of the common good, that it is not calculable. It is too variable and therefore cannot be a sound basis for good governance. And then you have, after that idea is imposed and through generations after generation after generation, it is cemented into the political thinking of the people, it can then be used as a reference point for what good morality is. This is called habituation of vice through force. So I call it habituation of vice through force. You do something long enough that it becomes natural and it seems fine and good to you, but in reality it's not. Whereas the right says moral principles, first principles that can be deduced through reason, that have a demonstrable impact on conduct and are justifiably good in the correct sense, that are justifiably wise guiders of moral action. The right says, the capital R right says, that should be the sort of conditioning and the guiding of our political order. So, DOGE is attacking the utilitarianism by saying, it doesn't matter what the common good or the welfare of the whole is. It doesn't matter what the incalculable good says. What matters is the original functions of government, and they should be asserted on the basis of sound moral principles, and they should rule how our political order is, just as our founders intended. And in my opinion, there has been no greater assault on this immoral doctrine of utilitarianism. In my opinion, I think DOGE is going to be successful in hopefully disentangling the utilitarian menace from our government. It's going to have pushback, as it already has. People will be upset and they will be mad and they will use arguments from emotion, but that doesn't matter. What matters is the institution is disentangled from this, and then later the culture can be disentangled from the thinking. The thinking will still persist, but if the institution is disentangled, the thinking will not have as much of a danger to the people as it does right now. My friends, like, share, comment, subscribe, do whatever you can, study history, study philosophy, and world living, and please stay pensive. Bye, guys.